Buonasera, eccoci qua. Good evening. So we can start. This evening we have Professor Hong Sora. First of all, I really want to thank you for accepting our invitation. She is currently an associate professor at the Faculty of Literature, Languages, Arts, Social Sciences, Science and Humanities at the University of La Rochelle in France. And she is also an historian of contemporary Korea. She is also the associate member of the Center of the Researchers sur la Corée. Her research are in this moment focused on Korean contemporary history, history of cinephilia in Korea, and popularization of cinephilia, and the reception of popular culture of the elite, and Korean New Wave, and the end, the women in the film industry in South Korea. She completed her studies with a PhD in history and civilization in France, and she studied at the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. So actually we didn't study together because I graduated in 2001 and she started, so she studied the French. And I found an article which is very interesting. It will be published in these days. It names Introduction of Female Filmmakers into the South Korean film world in the 1990s. So I think it's very interesting. And she also worked for the KBS and podcasts for some interesting programs such as special documentary and young people learning Korea, etc., etc. So today she will talk about the legitimation of South Korea cinema and the Korean New Wave. So thank you again. I will give the floor.
Buonasera. Oggi ho il piacere di essere qui con voi in questa splendida città di Siena. Sono Hong Sora, professoressa associata presso l'Università di La Rochelle in Francia. Storica della Corea contemporanea. Hello. Well, I hope that what I have just said is understandable. I actually studied Italian for a semester when I was an undergraduate. Obviously, I have forgot almost everything. But I wanted to take some opportunity to practice a little. However, I cannot give you the seminar in Italian, so I will go back to English. Thank you for your understanding. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Kim Guk-jin as well as Ms. Jung Imsuk who allowed this opportunity, and also to all those who will pay attention to my speech. This seminar is entitled Legitimation of South Korean Cinema, the Generation of the Cultural Centers, and the Korean New Wave in 80s and 90s. Before starting the presentation, I'd like to give you some simple explanations of the expressions mentioned in subtitle. First of all, the 문화원 세대 refers a group of cinephiles who forged their cinephilia in the French and German culture centers in Seoul. There is another key word, which is Korean New Wave. What is Korean New Wave? The Korean New Wave is the new wave of South Korean cinema in the 80s and 90s. And this expression was made official at the first Busan Festival in 1996. You know about the festival, no? You've heard about it, yeah, okay. So here are some directors who have been presented as part of the Korean New Wave, like Im Kwon-taek of Seopyeonjae, Park Kwang-soo of the Black Republic, Jang Seon-woo of The Road to the Racetrack, or Jung Ji-young of White Badge. Have you heard about them? Yeah? No? Well, you may know Im Kwon-taek. And the others, I don't think so. You may know Im Kwon-taek if you're very interested in South Korean cinema. Well, I know that the South Korean directors which are famous nowadays is like Park Chan-wook, Bong Joon-ho, Hong Sang-soo. Yeah. Then, well, there is no one who knows about them. Then why I talk about the Korean New Wave? That's because it was the moment from when the South Korean cinema started to be considered as the seventh art. And also, the key of the Korean New Wave that I will mention today is the fruit of the reception of the Italian neorealism in South Korean cinema. So, to approach the issue, let us first look at the socio-historical context. After the first golden age of South Korean cinema at the end of the Korean War, you know where the Korean War have been ended? 1953, okay. Good work. So after the end of the Korean War and from the end of 60s, under the authoritarian regime of Park Chung-hee, who considered cinema as a tool of domination and propaganda, the contempt of the South Korean spectators for the country's cinema was very strong. In other words, the first golden age of South Korean cinema took place after the Korean War, but it didn't last long. From the late 60s, the creation of many popular magazines, as well as the multiplication of television channels, offered the South Korean population more and more entertainment choices. At the same time, the dictatorship of Park Chung-hee pushed filmmakers to make films in favor of government. As a result, South Korean cinema in the 70s was polarized into two categories: propaganda films and entertainment films. Thus, the country's cinema experienced a dark age. In an autobiographical film by Jung Ji-young, 헐리우드 키드의 생애, we can notice this content. This film tells about the life of young moviegoers in the 70s. They are fascinated by Hollywood or European films like Bicycle Thief. Okay. Oh, good. A Streetcar Named Desire. Wow, okay. East of Eden. Okay. Don't Touch the Grisby. Okay. And Roman Holiday. Yeah. For these young suburbanites in Seoul, Korean cinema is boorish. And it does not deserve 고급 관객. So high-class viewers, high-class spectators like them. However, from the mid-80s, we can notice the change in the status of South Korean cinema. First of all, it began to attract international attention. Among 21 South Korean films awarded at foreign film festivals from the beginning of the history of Korean cinema, so it was in 1919. To the end of 20th century, 6 films were released in the second half of the 80s and 13 in 90s. Among others, we can notice 달마가 동쪽으로 간 까닭은 Why Did Bodhidharma Go to the East by 배용균 and 하얀 전쟁, White Badge by 정지영. The fact that South Korean films won awards at international festival was surprisingly good news for the country. For example, for the daily newspaper 경향신문, the grand prize awarded to Why Did Bodhidharma Go to the East at the 42nd Locarno Festival was an achievement that advanced the level of Korean cinema by a generation. And the fact that White Badge was awarded as the best film at the 5th Tokyo International Film Festival in 1992 prompted a comment from a 동아일보 on the newly recognized potentiality of our cinema. From then on, the media started to talk about South Korean directors as artists. Thus, the word 작가 started to be used to name a South Korean director. Actually, this term, so 작가, was previously reserved for the field of literature and visual arts. During the same period, the term 방화, have you heard about this term 방화? 방화. I'll explain you. Well, the term 방화 was replaced by more neutral expressions such as 한국 영화, so Korean cinema, and 국산 영화, domestically produced films. It means that before this period, South Korean cinema was called 방화, reflecting a point of view very pejorative. Through the use of these expressions, we can glimpse that South Korean cinema has finally gained access to a form of cultural legitimacy. In the 90s, we see a growing interest of intellectuals in cinema. For example, the literary magazines, which were the prerogative of the elite, also showed interest in cinema. Previously, film criticism was a genre sidelined by these journals because of prejudice about film, like a film, especially South Korean film, was either mere entertainment or propaganda. However, the new cultural journals founded as early as the late 80s have presented their readers as with those criticism and theories relevant to cinema. They have imposed the cultural authority and legitimacy of this artistic genre, which is freshly admitted in South Korea. Finally, the academic world responded to this change in society's general perspective on cinema. Since the establishment of the Bachelor of Arts in Theater and Film Studies at 서라벌 Institute of Arts, in Korean, 서라벌 예술 초급대학 in 1953, and until the late 80s, there were only about 10 schools, 10 universities where students could study film in South Korea. Starting in 1995, the number of institutions offering higher education in the field of film expanded. So, in the field of South Korean cinema, there have also been remarkable changes. First of all, the 5th and 6th amendments to the film law have allowed the entry of new personnel in the industry. On the other hand, with economic growth, cinema was seen as an important cultural issue that could generate attractive profits for large local companies. 더 재벌. You know what is 재벌? Well, there is an explanation. Their investment in 충무로, so South Korea's Hollywood, began with the popularization of video player. You know what it is? VHS, video home system. But you're so young. But anyway, so there was the popularization of the system VHS in South Korea as early as the mid-80s. So the 재벌 who manufactured VHS was Samsung and Gold Star, which is LG today, and Daewoo. They manufactured and sold VHS, and they wanted to secure the contents of video cassettes as well. Therefore, they entered the film production business by prepaying the right to sell the video cassettes from the films. And these new investors prefer to work with young filmmakers. Why? Because this is primarily because the age of the heads of the media division of the big companies was relatively consistent with that of the young producers. In addition, the old system of production financing was not transparent. But young people used the investment funds for film production in a compliant way. Thus, gradually, in the South Korean film industry, the new personnel could have a stronger voice. So we can schematize this emergence of South Korean cinema from the dark age of 70s to the new wave of Korean cinema, the Korean New Wave. Borrowing from Bourdieu's ideas, so Pierre Bourdieu, you know about him? No. Bourdieu is a French sociologist. Well, anyway. Borrowing from his ideas, we can understand that South Korean cinema, which was in sphere of legitimable, had access to the sphere of legitimacy, thanks to the various authorities of legitimation. It means that depending on the cultural legitimacy that a society attributes to them, we can identify three areas of cultural milieu. The first one, the sphere of legitimacy, like, traditional art like classical music or literature. So it is considered as the real art, The second one is the sphere of legitimable. So like cinema or photography or jazz. It's not really art, but it can be art, but I don't know. Well, that's it. The third one is the sphere of art arbitrary. So like fashion, decoration, cooking. It's a cultural thing, but it's really complicated to say it is on art, So there are three areas. So unlike classical music and the visual arts, cinema, which in its early days was perceived as popular entertainment, has had to struggle to raise its status. During the transition of South Korean cinema from the sphere of the legitimable to the sphere of legitimacy, there are many authorities of legitimation, like the valorization of Korean cinema at European film events, the awarding of government's cultural decorations to South Korean filmmakers, the increased interest of intellectuals in cinema, the success of the first Busan International Film Festival with the spread of the Korean New Wave, and the establishment of bachelor's, master's, and doctoral programs in film studies at several universities. Okay? Now, you know that in the 80s and 90s, we can notice the cultural legitimization of South Korean cinema. However, some questions remain unanswered because in this sham, we neglect and forget about moviegoers, spectators, in other words, cinephiles. That's why from now on, I will tell you about the 문화원 세대. What is the 문화원 세대? So, considering the definition of the 문화원 세대 as it refers a group of individuals born during the baby boom period. So, okay, in Europe, baby boom period is like at the end, after the end of the Second World War. In Korea, baby boom period is when? After the Korean War. So between 55 and 63. So they were born during the baby boom period and formed through cinephilic activities at the French Cultural Center and the Goethe Institute of Germany in Seoul between 77 and 84, who focused on the evolution of South Korean cinema during 80s and 90s. Etymologically, the 문화원 세대 is composed by 문화원, meaning cultural centers, and 세대, meaning a generation. So the young film lovers forged their cinephilia, so the love for cinema, together through the film programs of FCC, French Cultural Center, and also the Goethe Institute. As for 세대, although the Korean word means generation, depending on the approach, it can be interpreted as a group, a generation, and also a social network. And in order to better grasp the changing connections between social actors in the 문화원 세대, we focus more attention on its conception as a social network. Therefore, we define the 문화원 세대 as a set of individuals constituting through cinephilic activities at the FCC and the Goethe, a network that was attached to the evolution of South Korean cinema during the 80s and 90s. And concerning the cinephilia of the 문화원 세대, its evolution can be understood as a fierce duel of the aesthetic ambition and the political ambition of the 문화원 세대 in relation to the socio-political context of the country. Aesthetic ambition was fueled by scholarly type of cinephilia from Europe, particularly France and Germany. As the FCC and Goethe, the future social actors of the 문화원 세대 were able to watch French and German films, especially those of the Nouvelle Vague of French cinema and German expressionist cinema. Previously, South Koreans who did not have sufficient access to these artistic and legendary films maintained a kind of illusion about the artistic beauty of cinema. Since the launch of the film programs in the European cultural centers, the actors of the social actors of the network anchored at the FCC and the Goethe have adopted an artistic approach to South Korean cinema. In addition, following the founding the film clubs within these two cultural centers in the late 70s, dreaming of the evolution of the country's cinema, they worked to recognize artistic values in South Korean films. After receiving the ideas from Louis Giannetti, have you heard? Well, that's not so. Siegfried Kracauer, André Bazin, and François Truffaut. Okay, that's okay. They wish to apply the cinéma d'auteur policy of author cinema, okay, to South Korean cinema. Well, anyway, they wanted to, gain the status of art for the South Korean cinema. And what was then their political ambition? Well, I told about 80s and 90s. In the 80s, in Korea, in South Korea, there was the movement for democratization. That's it. So, on the other side, the political ambition comes from locally, from the discourses of the cultural movement in favor of 민중. We can understand 민중 as the people. The latter was both a victim of the social contradictions produced by the ruling class and the hope that was to enable real revolution of society. This expression was redefined by South Korean intellectuals in the 70s. And during the 80s, this term played an important role in the democratization movement in South Korea, combining with the struggles against the foreign countries' intervention. So the social actors of 문화원 세대 had already incorporated a number of ideas from the cultural movement for 민중 during their teenage years. And upon receiving this idea, the 문화원 세대 perceived the government's film policy and the industry's film production system as the main reasons for the dark age of South Korean cinema. According to the political ambition of the 문화원 세대's cinephilia, cinema was to contribute to the development of people's lives. And according to the degree of importance of these two ambitions, we can make a periodization of the 문화원 세대's cinephilia, like that, and which ends with the opening of the Busan Film Festival in 1996. So the first period began in 1977 with the establishment of the film clubs at the French Cultural Center in Seoul. In 1978, another film club was founded at the Goethe Institute, and before that, film lovers did not make connections. They didn't know each other, and they didn't do film activities together. They simply recognized the people they often met at film screening in cultural centers. The members began to discuss and study cinema together in a self-taught way. In 1979, the students of Seoul National University, who were also members of European cultural centers in Seoul, established their own university film club, which is Yallajong. So I think you have already understood that during this period, the aesthetics ambition was strongly present. The second period is between 84 and 86. Since the end of the first period, the aesthetic ambition was quickly limited. Why? Why? In 1980, in South Korea, there was Gwangju. So, in the coup of December 12 in 1979, Chun Doo-hwan took power. And following the Gwangju uprising in 1980, which his government executed in order to stabilize this power, he practiced many policies to appease the people's disgust with the dictatorship. In the context of the growing struggles for democratization in the country, the 문화원 세대 began to lead the movement for alternative cinema within the framework of the cultural movement in favor of 민중. And for this movement, the 문화원 세대 created a slogan, small cinema. Small. Why small? Actually, small cinema refers to films shot with an 8 millimeters or 16 millimeters camera. Now we have smartphone, but then no. So since the 35 millimeter camera was used for commercial films, this name, though small cinema, was used to distinguish the films of young filmmakers, so actually mostly university students. from those of their elders. In addition, 작다, so small, is often a metaphor for purity and sincerity in Korea. The interest of small cinema is familiar with the third world film movement, including Brazil's Cinema Novo. No? Okay. The struggles of Bolivia's Ucamau group and Argentina's Grupo Cine de Liberación, aiming to ensure a certain realism in South Korean cinema with which the 문화원 세대 wished to contribute to the evolution of people's lives. It was inspired by the model of documentary films. On the other hand, the 문화원 세대 tried to theorize the small cinema with the aim of establishing an art movement in South Korean cinema. Thus, some members founded a quarterly magazine, which is 열린 영화. Is that the right? But due to the radicalization of the 문화원 세대 members and personal problems that arose, like, during the first period, they were almost university students. And after that, during the period 2, they had to earn money, So they had some personal problems like financial difficulties of their families who desire to study abroad. So their aesthetic quest for cinema could not develop as much as they would like to. Consequently, during the second period of their cinephilia, the 문화원 세대 tried to achieve the balance between their aesthetic and political ambition, but did not succeed, as the latter quickly overtook the former. So in the third period, following the success of the small cinema festival, university students who were impressed with the idea of 문화원 세대 established their own film clubs at their universities with the help of the 문화원 세대. As a result, the perspective of the 문화원 세대 was spread more widely, but in a more militant way, with the effervescence of the movement for the democratization of the South Korean society. The small cinema was replaced by another slogan, which is the 민족 영화, 민족 cinema, national cinema or cinema for the people. The third period begins in 1987 when 민족 cinema appears. And, 1987, there is a film entitled 1987. Okay, I think Mr. Kim will talk about this historical event. Anyway, in 1987, the effervescence for the democratization was really spread widely. Anyway, the expression is constructed with the term 민족, which translates to the people, but in a nationalistic framework. This nationalism is first used to oppose the powers of foreign countries considered too interventionist in the country's politics, polluting Korean culture and constraining the people through authoritarian rule. Then it refers to the reunification in order to reproduce a purely Korean culture, and finally, to strengthen the idea of a national identity. From then on, film theories from the West were despised, considered only as an intervention of foreign forces. In the face of the increasing oppression of pro-democratization activists by the government, all actions that emphasized the artistic value of the work were considered submission to the dominating force, and thus an elitist attitude. In this context, cinema was relegated to the rank of a simple tool in the struggle for the democratization of the country. The 민족 영화, the 민족 cinema, was interested in North Korean cinema. And Korean cinema, insofar as it is bearer of the socialist idea in Korean history. Consequently, all artistic approaches to cinema became despised and discourses on Korean seventh art stopped evolving. And unlike the starting points of the 문화원 세대, where the search for the artistic value of South Korean cinema was the focus, its political ambition clearly took precedence over the aesthetic one. So it means that the initial cinephilia turned into a social movement. However, in the late 80s, the democratization of South Korea occurred, as you know very well. And the activists were able to reap, to some extent, the fruits of their struggles. So this extreme period of 문화원 세대 cinephilia came to an end. In the fourth and last period, we again discover an attempt to balance the two ambitions of 문화원 세대 cinephilia, so aesthetic ambition and political ambition. On the one hand, 민족 cinema has abandoned the demonization of the artistic pursuit of cinema. On the other hand, the members of the 문화원 세대 who had not joined the movement of 민족 영화, 민족 cinema, attached some importance to the fact that cinema could contribute to the improvement of people's lives. Therefore, a perspective favorable to the critical realism of cinema constitutes a form of convergence essential to the integration of the two values pursued by the 문화원 세대. The founding of the journal 영화 언어, so language of cinema, in the late 1989 is an exemplary case in point. So it was also editors of this journal who founded the Busan Festival and led discourses on the Korean New Wave. We can mention 전양준, 박광수, 이효인, 이용관. I think you don't know them. Well, that's okay. The Busan International Film Festival is thus the result of the convergence of small cinema and 민족 cinema, and also that of aesthetic and political ambitions of 문화원 세대's cinephilia. Therefore, the selection of the Korean New Wave films was made according to the prism of critical realism of 문화원 세대. Since Korean New Wave presented itself as the first art movement in South Korean cinema, the films of directors stamped as a new wave of South Korean cinema rose to the level of art, leaving other productions in the field of entertainment. However, among the directors of the Korean New Wave, there is not, strictly speaking, a common aesthetic. Only the political criticism of the contradictions of society constitutes the common denominator of the films under the name of critical realism. This is a new aspect of Korean cinema, which until then was perceived very negatively because it was subject to an authoritarian regime and to a dictatorship. Therefore, the choice of realism for a set of films seemed sufficient to understand the Korean New Wave as an art movement. Moreover, it was on this point that two ambitions of the 문화원 세대 cinephilia agreed. So we can therefore understand the evolution of aesthetic and political ambitions within the 문화원 세대 cinephilia in this way. The dual between aesthetic ambition and political ambition, the dual was resolved by a return to realism, which was the tradition, South Korean cinema's tradition after the reception of neorealism, Italian neorealism in 50s. First, in discovering European cinema with their own ideas, with their own eyes, 문화원 세대 members had a strong aesthetics ambition. However, depending on the social context, by participating in the struggles against the dictatorship, during the second and third periods, political ambition became more important than aesthetic ambition. The latter was even demonized during the third period. Following the democratization of the late 80s, the 문화원 세대 sought again the establishment of South Korean seventh art, and we find an attempt to balance the two ambitions. In each period, the relationship that 문화원 세대's social actors had with each other evolved differently. So we can identify the links in two categories. The first is symbolic. It concerns the desires of the social actors, and second comes from the technique, the processes, or the know-how shared between them. Another French sociologist, Dominique Oberle, calls them differently, like symbolic link, in French, lien symbolique, and material link, so lien matériel. Within the social network of the 문화원 세대, the desire to develop South Korean cinema constitutes a symbolic link. With regard to this desire, we have seen earlier the two main ambitions in terms of the 문화원 세대's cinephilia. In order to achieve their goal, the social actors of the 문화원 세대 carried out various activities, and these constitute the material links. Okay? So during the first period, this network formed both symbolic and material links within the French culture centers and the Goethe Institute. In the second period, the 문화원 세대 started to communicate with society. This social network, initially dedicated to film enthusiasts gathered in European establishments, thus expanded with the entry of sympathizers who supported the political ambition of the 문화원 세대. Their links were then strengthened by participating in the democratization movement until the end of the third period. However, the ties, the links consolidated during the third period are mainly symbolic, as some of the original 문화원 세대 social actors did not actively participate in the struggles. Included are material ties that gradually weakened. However, the 문화원 세대's ties still remained important. Why? Because the presence of antagonism, for example, the oppression of the the dictatorship, strengthened the solidarity within the network. Therefore, the intensification of symbolic ties was able to make up for the weakening of material links. On the other hand, since the fourth period, this imbalance has led to weakening of the links between the social actors of 문화원 세대. With the aesthetic ambition that was once again recognized in the network, social actors who had not retained the consensus on this ambition found themselves on the banks of the network. We thus see that the transformation of the links between the social actors of the 문화원 세대 ends with the return to weak links. However, in the South Korean film field of the 90s, during which the 문화원 세대 became more prominent than before, the ties between 문화원 세대 social actors, even if they remained weak, functioned as symbolic capital. So, the cinephilia of the 문화원 세대 played an important role in the cultural legitimization of South Korean cinema. Indeed, before the emergence of this network, there were always young people who did not be satisfied with the dark age of the country's cinema and who desired its evolution. The difference is that 문화원 세대 has been able to make this wish come true, which until then had been seen only as a daydream. However, it should be remembered that for the social actors of the 문화원 세대, there were several opportunities for them to act together for the evolution of the country's cinema. For example, the possibility of viewing European films more easily at the film programs of foreign cultural centers, or the reform of the Korean film law industry, the media, the university, and the recognition of the government and the foreign film world. So earlier I mentioned the valorization and intellectualization of South Korean cinema and the upheaval in the film industry as the authorities of the legitimation of South Korean cinema. So in the 80s and 90s, we can see the emergence of 문화원 세대 members as directors, producers, and also film critics, and also university professors. In the midst of the upheaval in the South Korean film industry, their elders remained passive in the face of changes in the field. On the contrary, the 문화원 세대 adapted more actively to this circumstance and stimulated the settlement of those who were in its network. Those who entered to the industry as a result of changes in the film law became a new type of film producer. Previously, a producer was considered to be the staff or a company that takes on the investment for a film. But these new film producers took care of all stages of production, like from planning to promotion, sometimes even distribution. So together with new table investors, the new producers who are part of the 문화원 세대 opened the way for young directors. The latter could also have the support of film critics from the 문화원 세대 network. The links between the social actors in this network thus began to function as a capital of social relations in the South Korean film community. South Korean filmmakers who were recognized abroad, mainly in the West, in Europe, also corresponded with those who were championed by the network's film critics. As a result, within the country, the voice of the 문화원 세대 was more respected. And media's perceiving the growing public interest in cinema, also positioned themselves in favor of the 문화원 세대. Those members were younger, more innovative, and more intellectual. As a result, through various types of media, the 문화원 세대 cinephilia was disseminated more easily and more widely. At the same time, with the establishment of film studies in higher education, 문화원 세대 members were recruited as university professors, even just with master's degrees. Therefore, the cinephilia of 문화원 세대 was further legitimized. And from then on, the film knowledge of the 문화원 세대 was of great value as a cultural capital. So, the 문화원 세대 could ensure some role in raising the status of South Korean cinema as many legitimating authorities operated. So we can therefore consider the 문화원 세대 to be the primary beneficiary of the legitimating authorities competing for the legitimacy of the 80s and 90s. However, despite these socio-cultural and political contexts, without the consistent efforts of these social actors, the 문화원 세대 perspective could not have been widely received. For this reason, we can consider the 문화원 세대 as a facilitator of the cultural legitimization of South Korean cinema. As such, the Korean New Wave is more of a symbol of the cultural legitimization of South Korean cinema and the passage of the 문화원 세대 from the periphery to the heart of the system. At the same time, we can notice the immaturity of the Korean New Wave. Immature, because the South Korean society, which recognized the artistic value of cinema and the rise of its status, expected something more innovative than what this new wave presented. The Korean New Wave was in the continuity of its duty to the previous decade, which was centered to the democratization and the omnipresence of critical realism, as an aesthetic could not satisfy the expectations of the early 21st century. As a result, this is why today the Korean New Wave is only found in the books of South Korean film history. So it's no more that you didn't heard about that. And I know that now in Europe, if we talk about Korean New Wave, is more about Park Chan-wook and Bong Joon-ho. That's why. But in South Korea, we call them like directors of post-Korean New Wave. So as soon as the post-Korean New Wave filmmakers who caught the attention of the audience with their genre film, among others Park Chan-wook, Bong Joon-ho, Kim Ji-woon, Lee Chang-dong, and Hong Sang-soo, you know all about them? Mostly? No, I think so. So, the Korean New Wave is the old New Wave, you know. So, the old New Wave directors disappeared. It is therefore understandable why this expression is more widely used to designate the directors of the post-Korean New Wave who were ultimately more innovative. So we have to say that the Korean New Wave has faded away. All that remains is the rhetorical terms for a new wave of Korean cinema. Moreover, today, the directors of the Korean New Wave are no longer making films. Most of the social actors in our present research have become university film professors, despite their former promises to make films again. But in the Korean history, the Korean New Wave is important because, as I told you, it's from the Korean New Wave that South Korean cinema is considered as like something good. Before, even South Korean didn't like their films. So, it was the conclusion. Thank you. Thank you for your listening carefully. If you have some questions, don't hesitate, please.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm very interested that the film, when that day comes, I think the director is Chang Juna, right? 1987. Mm-hmm. I saw this film is very touchable. Mm-hmm. So I really hope in the future want to show this film to our students. It's very important to know the story of this period related to the Gwangju uprising. Is a very important moment in the Korean history. So it was very interesting. I'm wondering why you began to take an interest on Korean cinema, so, because you actually a historian, yeah. Of Korean contemporary of Korean story, but as you mentioned, actually in this moment Korean cinema is quite is becoming very important, successful in the world. But actually we have so few researches on Korean cinema. So I think it's very important what you are doing in this moment. But I want to know why did you begin to take an interest?
Well, my initial subject for my PhD dissertation was not that. Was not 문화원 세대. It was about, I was interested in the reception of French cinema in the Korea, colonized Korea, so in 20s and 30s. But my director, which is a really great, historian of Korea in France, he have broken my desire. He asked me a question. The question was, so Sora, can you read Japanese? No. Well, according to him, for studying, the colonial period, I had to, study Japanese. So I abandoned the subject, and after I was like, now what I have to do? What to do? And then he told me about 문화원, the cultural centers. It was interesting, but I think I was interested in 문화원 because of some illusion. In fact, in South Korea, when filmmakers of older generation, when they talk about French Culture Center, there's we can think that like there was something special. So that's what I was searching, you know. What I waiting for was something special, something fantastic in cultural center. That's it. That was it. But in my research, what I really found it was that there was just some kind of centers, kind of, you know, places done where some cinephiles, some crazes about the cinema was gathered. That's all. That's all. But then why the cultural centers? Why Munawan is considered like some places like really special, really fantastic? Because there was a place which was permitted to just some little number of elites. Well, in the first period, you know, there is a registration form for the French Cultural Centers Film Club. There is. Well, we can see the name in English, name in Korean, and also in, you know, Sino-Korean. And there is something like what university. It means that for being the member of film clubs at this moment in French cultural centers or Goethe Institute, you had to be university student. And at the time, there was not so many university students. It was smaller than 1% of the total population was university students in South Korea at the time. So, contrary is not, now it's not the case, but at the time, university students, it means that you are the elite. You are the future leader of the society. That's why when we talk about culture center, even today, we think that it had to be really something, well, fantastic, special. But in reality, no.
Thank you. Have you been to Busan, right?
Yeah.
Because many of our students will study Korean Busan. So I think many of them can have this opportunity to participate in Busan International Film Festival. And in this moment, we have some interesting film festival here in Italy, such as Udine, Florence, and Hangul here. He participated to this film festival. I don't know if we have Ilaria. Oh no, Ilaria Rigi. No, today no, she's not here. Vanessa. Oh right. So actually, many of our students are taking an interest in this field, in particular in the field of translation, because they are very interested to the translation Korean cinema. Okay, so yeah.
Just one thing. In March this year, I worked for the secretary of the Busan Festival, who came to France for a festival in Vuzu. Well, anyway, in France. So I think that if you speak very well Korean, you can have some chances. Well, you just speak English very well now, so that you can have a chance to work as intern for the festival. I think so. That's the question that I posed to him. Well, first of all, for my students in La Rochelle in France. But if you're interested in Korean cinema, why not?
very interesting. Thank you. Okay, any question? Okay, Julia?
So he is the technician.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, questo è acceso. I just wanted to ask you about, so I'm very much more interested in like new directors, Park Chan-wook, Bong Joon-ho, and
Past Korean New Wave, you mean?
post-Korean Wave. And I wanted to ask you how and if the Korean New Wave influenced them. You said that it was possible to have this post-Korean New Wave because of the Korean New Wave, but were they inspired by certain films, certain directors?
So I will take an example of Bong Joon-ho's case. Well, Bong Joon-ho is not, is not part of the baby boom generation, but he studied, sociology in University of Yonsei University. And when he was university student, that's when, the small cinema festival was held. And after this festival, in fact, university students who were impressed by the perspective of the Munawon Sedae, they wanted to create their own film clubs in the university. So there was Munawon Sedae who formed them and who helped them for create their, film clubs. And Bong Joon-ho, actually, he studied film in the film club in the university. And Park Chan-wook, also the case. It was Park Chan-wook who created the film club in 서강대학교, and after the small film festival. And also there is interesting episodes about the Park Chan-wook, which is Park Chan-wook was in fact film critics, and his critique was really theoretical and aesthetic. So the producers, film producers, which are very, they take attention very much about, money. So when they read the Park Chan-wook's text, Park Chan-wook's critics, they didn't want to, invest, gave some money for his films. Fortunately, Ian, a producer of the part of the Munawon Sedae, he decided to give to Park Chan-wook the last chance. And that's how, the film JSA could be produced. So yeah, that's why we can say post-Korean New Wave. And also the, director Lee Chang-dong, he was, assistant director. He was, at the first, he was in the directing team under the direction of Park Kwang-soo. And after he became an assistant director of the films of Park Kwang-soo. So there was Park Kwang-soo who taught Lee Chang-dong to how direct, how make some films. Okay, thank you. I know that my seminar was not so easy to understand. So, if you have any questions about Korean cinema or the status of women in Korean cinema, or if you did not really understand but you want to understand better, you can give me some questions.
if there are not students who want to ask some question, actually I want to ask something not about cinema, but the cultural movement or something, because there are many scholars who say that the 89 il 68 is absent in the Korean contemporary history, and that caused many problems that we are facing about social problems or polarization, labor problems, etc., etc. But when we consider this small group of 문화원 세대, because they were intellectuals, and as a professor said about the application form, they should be university students. They are intellects, the elites of that period in Korea. And when we remind who gave the motors for the 68, first in France and then in Europe and some countries in Asia, but in Korea, that kind of revolution not could be happen because there are dictatorships and the military campaign to assist U.S. for Vietnamese war and so on. Because when all the world was in the mood of this cultural revolution, Korea wasn't there, but the evolution of these 문화원 세대 and then their role or their desires for the for their interests of the cinema in a political way and in a artistic way. How about consider these 문화원 세대 as a kind of future 68 generation in the Korean contemporary pop culture or artistic movements, because their evolution and their rule above all in these days of Korean cinema, starting to the P Festival and so on, there are something that we can consider as in a similar way what they have done, what they could have done, etc., etc.
Could you please simplify your question, please?
In a short word, is it possible to consider these 문화원 세대 movements or their role as that of the university students that lead the cultural revolution of 68?
Well, I would say no. Because in fact, well, there was a movement for, for that. The cinema has to contribute the evolution of people's lives. That was their idea. That's real. But have they led the movement in a militant way? No. So it means that, the third period, which was really militant, it was led by, the members, no, not members, social members in 문화원 세대 network, not initial members. So it means that in this period, the initial members of the 문화원 세대, what they did, it was they became, for example, 정성일. You know him? No, okay. 정성일 is one of the greatest film critics in South Korea. And he is one of the initial members of the 문화원 세대. And that's him who tried to theorize in fact a small cinema. But in period three, what he did was, he was in the chief chief editor, chief editor of film review. So what he did for the Minjuk cinema, it was he supported the ideas of Minjuk cinema, and he have continued to show his support all along this period through the publications. And for example, Park Kwang-soo. His first film was shot, I think, in this period, and his first film, 칠수 and 만수, it has also showed, some support for the democratization movement. So it's linked, but it is not the initial members of the Munawan Sedae who was in the heart of the movement. Any questions?
Another questions?
I know my students in France is like you. They don't. Okay, if you have any questions, but you are somewhat shy, you can come to see me after the seminar. You're all welcome.
Ok, se non avete altre domande, noi stiamo per promuovere un altro progetto importante, interessante per voi studenti, quindi coinvolgendo anche gli studenti che studiano coreano qui all'Università La Rochelle, quindi in ballo c'è una cosa molto interessante che sarà molto coinvolgente anche per voi. Ok, se non avete altre domande, faccio solo l'ultima domanda semplicissima. 마지막 질문 해도 되죠?
네네네.
Have you ever have the chance to meet one of these directors, such as Lee Chang-dong, Park Chan-wook, Bong Joon-ho? What's your favorite director?
Well, actually, I met Park Kwang-soo, Hong Gi-sun. He's now wow, my word. His dad now. Or 임순례, 변영주, 김소영. Well, they are not in Munawan Sedae, but yeah. But my favorite director is my favorite director is Jang Jun-hwan. Yeah, I love his film like 지구를 지켜라, Save the Green Planet. Do you know? Have you heard about that?
Yeah,
It
yeah.
is amazing film, which is a little bit geek, a little bit strange, but I love this film. Yeah, if you, I strongly recommend this film,
Yeah.
but I think it'll be not so easy to find this film in Europe in these days. But anyway, Save the Green Planet. Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree. I love him. I love Lee Chang-dong too. Okay, thank you again. So we really hope to see you here again in Siena. I know you really love Siena,
Yeah,
right?
I really love this city.
Yeah.
The beauty.
So we'll be very happy to have you here again. Thank you again. Grazie per aver ascoltato con attenzione. Thank you for your perfect
감사합니다.
Italian.